Daniel Rivera was never the kind of soldier anyone expected to become a hero. He was 32 years old, a combat engineer who spent most of his time fixing broken equipment, setting up communication towers, and making sure supply routes stayed open. While other soldiers were out there fighting on the front lines, getting medals and recognition, Daniel was in the back covered in grease and dust, doing the unglamorous work that nobody really noticed. He'd been stationed on a distant planet called Viridia Prime for almost 3 years. The war there had dragged on forever, and honestly, Daniel was tired. He missed Earth, missed his family, missed the simple things like walking in the rain or eating real food instead of the recycled stuff they served in the military cafeteria. But he did his job, day in and day out, because that's what you do when you sign up for something bigger than yourself. The thing about Daniel was that he never wanted to be special. Back home, he'd been a regular guy who liked to tinker with machines and solve puzzles. He wasn't strong like the infantry soldiers or tactical like the officers. He was just good at fixing things and making things work. His commanding officers respected him, but nobody expected him to change the course of a war. That all changed during one terrible night when everything went wrong. The enemy forces launched a surprise attack on their base, and it was chaos. Explosions everywhere, people running, screaming, trying to find cover. Daniel's unit got separated, and before he knew it, he was alone in a damaged building with enemy soldiers closing in from all sides. Most people would have panicked. Most people would have tried to fight their way out or hide until help arrived. But Daniel's brain worked differently. He looked around at the broken equipment, the damaged power lines, and suddenly he saw a solution. The enemy had set up a massive shield system that protected their entire advance. If he could just get to the main power grid and overload it, maybe he could bring those shields down. It was dangerous. It was probably stupid. But Daniel didn't have many options. So he crawled through damaged corridors, avoided enemy patrols, and used every bit of engineering knowledge he had to reach the power station. His hands were shaking as he worked, rewiring circuits and redirecting power flow. One wrong move and the whole thing could explode, taking him with it. But Daniel had always been good with his hands, good at seeing how systems connected. He worked fast, sweat dripping down his face while explosions echoed outside. And then with one final connection, he did it. The enemy shields flickered and died, leaving their forces completely exposed. The Allied forces, who had been struggling to break through for weeks, suddenly had an opening. They pushed forward, caught the enemy by surprise, and within hours the tide of the battle had completely turned. By morning, the war that had lasted 3 years was effectively over. When Daniel's commanders found him, still sitting by that power station, exhausted and barely conscious, they couldn't believe what he'd done. One soldier, working alone with nothing but his knowledge and some tools, had ended a war. It sounded like something from a movie, but it was real. The news spread fast. Within days, everyone knew about the engineer who had done the impossible. Daniel suddenly found himself pulled from his quiet work and pushed into the spotlight. There were interviews, ceremonies, people wanting to shake his hand and take pictures. It was overwhelming and uncomfortable, and Daniel hated every second of it. But the worst part was the big ceremony the Viridian Council planned. The Viridians, the alien species whose planet had been caught in the middle of this war, wanted to honor the human who had freed them. They announced it would be broadcast across multiple star systems. Daniel would receive medals, land money, and some other traditional honors that honestly didn't mean much to him. He stood on that stage, wearing his dress uniform that felt too tight, with bright lights in his face and cameras everywhere. The Viridian leaders gave speeches in their musical language, which got translated through his earpiece. They talked about bravery and sacrifice and heroism, and Daniel just wanted to disappear. He wasn't a hero. He was just a guy who had been in the right place at the right time with the right skills. He'd done what needed to be done, nothing more. But nobody seemed to care about that. They needed their hero, their story with a happy ending, and Daniel was stuck playing that role whether he liked it or not. As the ceremony dragged on, Daniel found himself thinking about home, about his family, about normal life, about getting away from all this attention and just being regular again. He wondered how much longer he'd have to stand there, smiling for cameras and accepting congratulations from people he'd never met. He had no idea that the ceremony was about to take a turn that would make everything even more complicated. The Viridian Council had one more honor to bestow, one more tradition to follow, and when they announced it, Daniel's simple wish to just go home and be normal was about to become impossible. The universe has a funny way of complicating things, especially when you least expect it. And Daniel was about to learn that lesson in the most public, uncomfortable way possible. The ceremony had been going on for what felt like forever, when the Viridian Council elder stepped forward with the announcement that made Daniel's stomach drop. Speaking in their melodic language, which the translator converted to standard Earth speech, the elder explained an ancient tradition. When a great hero saved their people, they honored that person by offering what they called a life bond. 7 young Viridian women would be presented, all volunteers from respected families, and the hero would choose one to become their partner. It was meant to create lasting connection between species to show gratitude in the most personal way possible. Daniel felt his face go hot. This wasn't something anyone had warned him about. He glanced at his commanding officer standing off to the side, who looked just as surprised and uncomfortable as Daniel felt. But there was nothing to be done now. The ceremony was being broadcast live to billions of viewers. Refusing would be seen as an insult to an entire civilization. The 7 women were brought onto the stage, and Daniel's discomfort grew even worse. 6 of them looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Viridians were naturally tall and elegant, with skin that seemed to shimmer with soft colors like oil on water. These 6 women were stunning by any standard, and they knew it. They stood confidently, smiling at the cameras, clearly comfortable being the center of attention. But the 7th woman was different. She stood slightly separated from the others, and even from a distance, Daniel could see she was uncomfortable. While the other 6 were tall and thin, matching what Daniel had learned was the Viridian ideal of beauty, this woman had a fuller figure. She was shorter, rounder, and from the way she held herself, it was clear she felt out of place. Her name was Zara, though Daniel didn't know that yet. What he could see was how she seemed to be trying to make herself smaller, keeping her eyes down, her shoulders hunched slightly. While the other women posed and smiled, Zara looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her up. The crowd in the ceremony hall, and probably billions watching across the galaxy, expected this to be quick. Daniel would obviously choose one of the 6 beautiful, confident women. There would be some ceremonial words exchanged, and everyone could move on. It was supposed to be straightforward, but Daniel didn't move toward any of the 6 women everyone expected him to choose. Instead, something made him pause. Maybe it was the way Zara stood there looking so miserable. Maybe it was because he understood what it felt like to be somewhere you didn't want to be, doing something you didn't choose. Maybe it was because while the other 6 looked at him like he was some prize to be won, Zara looked like she was enduring punishment. Daniel walked slowly across the stage. He stopped briefly in front of each woman, trying to be respectful, trying to make eye contact and at least acknowledge them as people rather than objects in some ceremony. Some smiled at him, some seemed nervous, but they all had that same practiced public smile. When he reached Zara, she still wasn't looking up. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and up close Daniel could see she was trembling slightly. He could also see that she was beautiful in a completely different way from the others. Her face had character, warmth, something real about it that the perfect features of the others seemed to lack. Daniel made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He turned to the Viridian elder and said clearly, "I choose Zara." The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was like the entire universe had paused to process what just happened. Zara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock and something that looked almost like fear. The 6 other women exchanged glances, confusion, and maybe a bit of offense crossing their features. The Viridian Council members looked at each other, clearly not sure how to respond. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of this unexpected twist. In the crowd, whispers started. Confused murmurs grew louder. The human military representatives in attendance shifted uncomfortably. The broadcast commentators, who moments before had been confidently predicting which of the 6 appropriate candidates would be chosen, now stammered, searching for words to explain what had just happened. Daniel didn't care about any of. The days following the ceremony were absolutely crazy. Daniel had thought the attention before was bad, but now it was 10 times worse. Everyone, and I mean everyone, had an opinion about his choice. Human news networks ran endless segments analyzing what it meant. Viridian media outlets were in complete chaos. with some calling it romantic and others calling it insulting. Daniel was pulled into meetings with military psychologists who wanted to make sure he was mentally stable. They asked him questions about stress, about decision-making under pressure, about whether he'd been influenced by something during the war. It was ridiculous. He'd made a choice, that's all. But apparently it was the wrong choice in so many people's eyes that they needed to find reasons for it. The worst part was being confined to a diplomatic residence while everything got sorted out. The life bond ceremony wasn't just symbolic. It came with actual legal and cultural implications that bureaucrats from both species needed to work through. So Daniel was stuck waiting while the galaxy argued about him. He tried to ignore the news feeds, but it was impossible. Human commentators debated whether this showed that humans had completely different beauty standards than other species. Viridian social critics used his choice as ammunition in their own cultural debates. Everyone had a theory, and none of them bothered to actually ask Daniel why he'd done it. Meanwhile, Zara was going through her own nightmare. Daniel learned later that she'd been bombarded with messages, some supportive but many cruel. People accused her of manipulating the ceremony somehow, or suggested that Daniel had chosen her as some kind of joke. The attention she'd always tried to avoid was now unavoidable and intense. About a week after the ceremony, Daniel was finally told he could meet with Zara privately. They'd arranged a meeting in a quiet garden on the edge of the diplomatic quarter, away from cameras and crowds. Daniel was nervous, which was strange because he'd faced enemy fire and hadn't felt this anxious. When he arrived, Zara was already there, sitting on a bench under a tree with blue-silver leaves that swayed in the gentle breeze. She looked up as he approached, and Daniel could see the exhaustion on her face. This had been just as hard on her as it had been on him, probably harder. They sat in awkward silence for a moment. Daniel wasn't good at these kinds of conversations. He was better with machines than people, better with problems that had clear solutions. This was messy and complicated and personal. Zara spoke first. Her voice was soft but direct. "Why did you choose me? Everyone wants to know, and honestly, I need to know too. Was it to make some kind of point? To embarrass them?" She gestured vaguely back toward the city. "To embarrass me?" Daniel shook his head quickly. "No, nothing like that. He paused, trying to find the right words. "You looked like you didn't want to be there. Like you were going through something awful and had no choice about it. The others, they were performing, you know. But you looked real." Zara's expression shifted slightly, some of the defensiveness fading. "Real? Yeah. Everyone kept treating that whole thing like it was some kind of show, like we were all just playing parts. But when I saw you standing there trying to disappear, I recognized that feeling. I've been feeling that way since this whole hero thing started. I didn't ask for any of this attention, and I could see you didn't either." For the first time, Zara's expression softened a bit. "I volunteered for the ceremony," she admitted quietly. "But not because I thought anyone would choose me. In our culture, being like me," she gestured at herself, "it's rare, and it's not celebrated. I thought standing there with 6 perfect women would just prove what everyone's always told me. That I'm not good enough, that I don't belong. I thought maybe after that I could finally leave Viridia and go somewhere else where people wouldn't know me." Daniel felt a sharp pain in his chest. He understood that feeling more than she knew. "I had a sister," he said slowly. "She dealt with the same kind of thing back on Earth. People judging her, making her feel less than, all because she didn't look like what society said she should look like." Zara looked at him with new interest. "What happened to her?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. This was the hard part, the part he didn't talk about much. "She's not around anymore. She gave up. And I wasn't there to help her, to tell her that all those people were wrong." The silence that followed was heavy but not uncomfortable. Zara seemed to be processing this, understanding something deeper about why Daniel had done what he did. "So you felt sorry for me," she finally said, but her tone wasn't accusatory. It was more like she was trying to understand. "No," Daniel said firmly. "Pity would be walking past you and feeling bad about it later. This was different. When I saw you there, I saw someone who was being treated as less than what they are. And I guess I was tired of letting that happen. Tired of watching people be invisible because others decide they're not worth seeing." Zara wiped at her eyes, though she was trying not to cry. "Do you have any idea what you've done? To my life, to your reputation? People think you're crazy or making fun of me or proving some weird point." "Yeah, I know," Daniel admitted. "And I'm sorry if I made things harder for you." But I'm not sorry I chose you, because in that moment you were the only person on that stage who seemed like an actual person, and not a performance. They sat together quietly for a while after that, both of them processing everything. The garden was peaceful, with small insects buzzing around flowers that looked nothing like earth flowers but still somehow felt familiar. It was the first real moment of calm Daniel had experienced since the war ended. Zara eventually started asking him about Earth, about his work, about normal things that had nothing to do with ceremonies or choices or galactic debates. Daniel found himself relaxing, talking about fixing machines and the satisfaction of solving technical problems. Zara told him about her work as a language specialist, about how she spoke 17 different languages and had helped establish communication protocols during the war. Wait, Daniel interrupted. You were part of the communication team? I used some of those protocols to coordinate with local forces. Zara nodded. I helped develop them. Languages are like puzzles, and I'm good at puzzles. I like puzzles too, Daniel said. That's basically what engineering is. Finding solutions where none seem to exist. For the first time since meeting, they both smiled. It wasn't romantic or dramatic. It was just two people realizing they might actually understand each other a bit. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Zara met regularly in that same quiet garden. It became their escape from the media circus that continued raging around them. At first, these meetings were awkward, both of them still unsure about this situation they'd been thrust into. But gradually, something shifted. Daniel learned that Zara wasn't just smart, she was brilliant. She had a mind that worked in fascinating ways, connecting patterns across different languages and cultures. She could explain complex ideas in simple terms, and she had a dry sense of humor that caught Daniel off guard and made him laugh genuinely for the first time in years. Zara discovered that beneath Daniel's quiet, reserved exterior was someone who thought deeply about things. He wasn't just a technical person who fixed machines. He cared about fairness, about people being treated right, about doing the right thing even when it was difficult, and he never, not once, mentioned her appearance unless it was to push back when she criticized herself. One afternoon, they were sitting by a fountain, watching the water create rainbow patterns in the sunlight. Zara had been quiet for a while, which Daniel had learned usually meant she was working up to saying something difficult. Can I ask you something? She finally said, Sure. Your sister. What was her name? Daniel hesitated. He hadn't said her name out loud in months. Lily, her name was Lily. Tell me about her. If you want to, I mean. You don't have to. So Daniel did. He talked about how Lily had been funny and creative, how she'd loved painting and could make beautiful art from nothing. He talked about how she'd struggled with people's comments and judgments, how she'd tried so hard to fit into boxes that didn't suit her. And he talked about how he'd been deployed far away when she'd made her final decision. I got the message 3 days after, Daniel said quietly. My parents sent it, but communications were delayed because of the war. By the time I knew, she'd already been gone for days. I couldn't even get back for the memorial. I was stuck on some base fixing equipment while my family dealt with everything. Zara reached over and took his hand. It was the first time they'd really touched beyond formal greetings, and it felt natural. You couldn't have known. That's what everyone says. But I knew she was struggling. I just thought, I don't know, I thought she'd be okay until I got back. That I'd have time to be there for her. Time to tell her that all those people who made her feel small were wrong. Is that why you chose me? Because I reminded you of her? Daniel thought about that carefully. Partly, yeah, but not in the way you might think. It wasn't about replacing her or fixing something I couldn't fix before. It was more like, when I saw you standing there being treated like you were less than everyone else, I had a chance to do something, to not walk past someone who needed to be seen. Does that make sense? Zara nodded slowly. I think so, and I need to tell you something too. Something about why I volunteered for that ceremony. She took a deep breath. I'm a xenolinguist. Do you know what that means? I work with languages from different species, help people communicate across cultures. During the war, I was instrumental in setting up the communication networks that let all the different allied forces coordinate. I translated critical intelligence, helped negotiate with resistance groups, basically made it possible for everyone to work together. That's amazing, Daniel said. But nobody knows about it. Or if they know, they don't care. Because whenever I'm in a room, whenever I present my work, People see me first and my work second. Sometimes they don't get to my work at all. There are jokes, comments, suggestions that maybe I should try this diet or that exercise, and I just got so tired of it. I thought if I stood there at that ceremony, if I was publicly rejected in front of the entire galaxy, it would be the final proof. Then I could leave Viridia, go somewhere else, start over where nobody knew me. I thought rejection would set me free. Daniel understood. But then I didn't reject you. No, you didn't, and suddenly I couldn't leave. I was bound to someone I didn't know, my face was everywhere, and people had even more opinions about me than before. I was so angry at first, angry at you for trapping me in this. Are you still angry? Zara smiled slightly. No, because something strange happened. All that attention I was terrified of? It started conversations. Young Viridians who look like me, who've been hiding or feeling ashamed, they started speaking up. People started questioning why we only celebrate one kind of beauty, one kind of body. It's uncomfortable and messy, but it's happening. And you helped make that happen, Daniel said. Your work, your intelligence, all of it is getting recognized now because people can't look away anymore. We both did. Your choice made people pay attention. My work gave them something worth paying attention to once they looked. They sat together, hands still linked, both understanding that something had shifted between them. This wasn't about romantic love or some fairy tale ending. It was about two people who'd been thrown together by circumstance and were finding something real in the chaos. Over the following weeks, they worked together on a project translating some old Viridian texts about pre-war history. Daniel's logical mind and Zara's linguistic skills complemented each other perfectly. They laughed over translation mistakes, debated interpretations, and slowly built something that felt like genuine friendship. Daniel found himself thinking less about Lily with pain and more with appreciation for what she'd taught him. Zara started carrying herself differently, with more confidence, speaking up when people tried to diminish her. They were both changing, both growing and doing it together. One evening, as they were walking back from the archives where they'd been working, Zara said something that surprised them both. I think we should make this official. The life bond, I mean. Not because we have to, but because I choose to. Daniel stopped walking. You're sure? You can back out of this. I'd understand. I know I can. But I don't want to. We work well together. We understand each other. And honestly, I can't imagine doing this with anyone else. Not the perfect ones from the ceremony, not anyone. You saw me when no one else did. That matters. Daniel felt something warm spread through his chest. I'd like that too. Not because of the ceremony or the tradition or any of that, but because you're brilliant and funny and you make me think about things differently. So they decided together, not because of tradition or pressure or expectations, but because they chose to. Making the life bond official wasn't a huge ceremony this time, thankfully. Just some paperwork, a small gathering of friends and family, and words spoken that actually meant something to both of them. Daniel's parents were able to attend via video link from Earth, and while they were confused about everything at first, they could see their son was happy for the first time in years. The real changes came after that. Zara and Daniel decided to split their time between Viridia and Earth, which meant a lot of traveling but also a lot of new experiences. When Zara first came to Earth, she was nervous about how humans would react to her, but Daniel's family welcomed her immediately, and she found that humans had their own struggles with appearance and judgment that she understood all too well. They started working together officially, combining their skills in unexpected ways. Daniel's engineering knowledge and Zara's linguistic abilities led to projects on improving communication systems between species. They developed better translation technology, worked on cultural exchange programs, and helped other species understand each other more effectively. But more importantly, their story kept creating ripples. On Viridia, the conversation about body diversity continued growing. Young people who'd felt excluded started finding their voices. Zara became an accidental spokesperson. Though she was still uncomfortable with public attention, she focused on her work, letting her expertise speak for itself. And gradually people started seeing her accomplishments first and her appearance second. Daniel found his own way to honor Lily's memory. He and Zara worked with mental health organizations on both Earth and Viridia, supporting programs that helped people struggling with self-worth and belonging. They never explicitly connected it to their own story, but people understood. 1 year after that famous ceremony, Daniel and Zara were invited to speak at an interstellar conference on cultural understanding. Standing together on stage, Daniel spoke about the importance of seeing people beyond surfaces, beyond first impressions, beyond what society tells you matters. Zara talked about her work, about the joy of connecting people across language barriers, about finding worth in what you do rather than how you look. She was nervous, her hands shaking slightly, but Daniel stood beside her, a steady presence, and she made it through. During the question session, someone asked the question everyone still wondered about. Daniel, if you could go back to that ceremony knowing everything that's happened since, would you make the same choice? Daniel didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Not just because of how things turned out, though I'm grateful for that, but because in that moment, choosing Zara was the right thing to do. She deserved to be seen, to be valued, to be chosen. Everyone does. And if my choice helped people understand that, then I'm glad I made it. Another person asked Zara, "How did it feel when he chose you?" Zara thought about that carefully. Honestly, at first I was terrified and confused. Eat,